The camera glides slowly downward, step by step, along a spiral staircase of cold, damp stone. The light above fades, swallowed by shadows. The air thickens, heavy with silence. Each footstep echoes as if the earth itself is hollow, whispering secrets long buried. And then, darkness. Beneath the glittering city of Paris, beneath the cafes and grand boulevards, beneath the glowing Eiffel Tower itself, lies another city. A city without windows, without sunlight. A city built not from stone and steel, but from bone. Human bone. Here the walls are lined not with bricks, but with skulls. Tibias and femurs stacked neatly like a mason's craft. Rows upon rows, endless and repeating, forming corridors of the dead that stretch into oblivion. This is the Catacombs of Paris. But do not think of it as just a cemetery. No, this is something far more haunting. This is a grave dug not for the few, but for millions. The remains of an entire city banished underground. It is at once a monument and a warning, a reminder that Paris, today the city of light, was once a city drowning in death. Imagine the late 1700s. Paris was bursting at the seams, not only with people, but with the dead. Cemeteries overflowed, bodies rotted in shallow graves, the stench of decay poisoned the streets. Disease spread through neighborhoods like wildfire. Water supplies ran dark with corruption. The living were choking on the dead. And so, in desperation, the leaders of Paris made a decision that would forever change the city's soul. They would carve out a new home for the dead, deep below the living. In the abandoned stone quarries beneath the city, wagon after wagon carried bones through the night. Priests muttered prayers by torchlight. And slowly, brick by brick, skull by skull, Paris created its own underworld. 6 million souls stacked in silence. Today, tourists walk those narrow halls, their footsteps crunching softly on gravel, their voices hushed as if afraid to disturb the eternal slumber around them. They snap photographs, they marvel at the eerie artistry of bones arranged in patterns. But behind the fascination lingers an unease, a realization that this is not a museum built by human hands for beauty. It is a tomb, a labyrinth of mortality. And deeper still, beyond the tourist trails, lie miles of tunnels, sealed off, forbidden, places where no guide will lead you, places where adventurers, trespassers, and the curious have vanished, swallowed by darkness, never to return. The catacombs are not just beneath Paris, they are beneath history itself, an undercurrent of horror flowing silently below the laughter, the music, and the lights. A reminder that even the most radiant city is built upon shadows. And so we descend together into this kingdom of the forgotten, into the Paris that lives not above ground, but below. Because the catacombs are not just a resting place for the dead, they are a mirror, reflecting our own fear of what awaits when life ends. They are the heartbeat of a city built upon bones. And once you step into the darkness, you may never look at Paris the same way again.
Paris, at the end of the 18th century, was not the romantic city we imagine today. No wide boulevards lined with cafes, no perfume drifting from flower stalls. Instead, the air in certain quarters was heavy, almost choking. It wasn't the smoke of fires or the filth of overcrowded streets that poisoned it. It was the smell of death. The source of this nightmare was the cemetery of Les Innocents, the oldest and largest burial ground in Paris. For centuries, it had served as the city's final resting place. Kings and beggars alike were buried there, their bones stacked upon one another in deep pits, layer after layer of humanity. But by the mid-1700s, it had become a monstrous, festering wound in the heart of Paris. The cemetery was crammed far beyond capacity. Corpses were squeezed into shallow graves. Sometimes bodies were left exposed, half-buried, their limbs protruding through loose soil. At times of plague or famine, thousands were interred in a matter of weeks. Pits filled so quickly that the earth itself could not absorb the decay. When it rained, the ground oozed with putrid runoff. The stench clung to the air, drifting into nearby homes, shops, and even churches. And then came the water. The wells that supplied Parisians with drinking water ran dangerously close to the burial grounds. Contaminated by decomposing flesh, the water turned foul. Families fell ill. Waves of disease swept through neighborhoods. Parisians whispered that they were drinking death itself. Imagine living in the shadow of Les Innocents. Children grew up playing in streets where skeletal remains sometimes surfaced from the ground. Merchants in nearby markets tried to sell bread and meat, while the reek of rot lingered in the air. Families who lived beside the cemetery would wake to find bones jutting out of crumbling walls, as if the dead themselves were pushing into the land of the living. Writers of the time described the atmosphere as unbearable. It was said that birds would not fly over Les Innocents, that the smell was so strong it clung to clothes and hair for days. At night, the cemetery became a place of dread. Locals swore they heard groans, whispers, the restless sighs of thousands of souls trapped in decay. And yet, despite the horror, the bodies kept coming. Paris was growing, its population swelling to over 500,000 by the late 1700s. Death, like life, needed space, and there was none left. Les Innocents was no longer just a cemetery. It was a breeding ground for disease, a chemical weapon against the living, and the people of Paris were the victims. By the 1770s, the crisis could no longer be ignored. Outbreaks of disease were linked directly to the cemetery's corruption. Physicians warned that the very air was poisoned. Residents petitioned the government demanding relief from the stench, from the sickness, from the suffocating shadow of death that hung over their lives. The authorities hesitated. Moving an entire cemetery with its centuries of burials was unthinkable. The church held enormous influence, and disturbing the dead was considered sacrilege. But reality was more powerful than tradition. Paris was drowning, not in water, but in death itself. Something had to be done. In 1780, the breaking point came. After weeks of heavy rain, a wall of Les Innocents collapsed. Behind it was not soil or stone, but a rotting mountain of corpses, tumbling into nearby cellars and flooding the basements of homes with human remains. The scandal could no longer be hidden. It was a catastrophe not only of sanitation, but of dignity. The dead had literally spilled into the living world. The decision was made. Les Innocents had to be emptied. The bones had to be moved. But where could the remains of centuries of Parisians, millions of them, be placed? The answer lay beneath Paris itself. Abandoned limestone quarries stretched for miles beneath the city, dark and silent. They were vast, empty caverns, carved by centuries of stone cutting, a city of tunnels beneath the city of light. And so, the plan was born. The cemeteries of Paris would be cleared, and the bones of the dead would be transported, under the cover of night, into this subterranean labyrinth. But before that great relocation began, Paris lived its final years in dread. Families who lived near Les Innocents often covered their windows with heavy cloth, hoping to block the smell. Priests walked through the cemetery in masks soaked with herbs, a futile attempt to shield themselves from the miasma of decay. Mothers whispered to their children not to wander too close for fear of sickness or of spirits. Every breath in that quarter was a reminder of mortality. Every drop of water tasted faintly of the grave. Every knock of sickness in the chest carried the question, is this because of the cemetery? Will I be the next to join them? By the late 18th century, Paris was a city of elegance and enlightenment, a capital of art and philosophy, but at its heart, rotting silently, was Les Innocents, a black hole of death. And until the bones were moved, the city itself was in peril. The stage was set for one of the most macabre undertakings in human history, the creation of the Paris Catacombs, a city's desperate solution born from the unbearable truth that the dead had overtaken the living.
Beneath the bustling streets of Paris lay a forgotten labyrinth, vast limestone quarries, abandoned after centuries of mining. These tunnels stretched for miles, silent and empty, their ceilings dripping with moisture, their walls echoing with the sound of nothing but their own stillness. By the late 18th century, most Parisians had no reason to think about them. They were places of danger, collapse, and superstition. But as the crisis of the cemeteries deepened, these dark caverns offered a chilling solution. In 1786, the Council of State decreed that the remains of Paris's overflowing graveyards would be moved into the abandoned quarries. It was a decision both practical and symbolic. The dead would be hidden away, deep underground, out of sight of the living. No longer would Paris choke on its own corpses. Instead, the city would bury its dead within itself. The process began quietly, almost secretly. Officials knew that disturbing cemeteries was a sensitive matter. The church demanded that the dead be treated with respect, even in mass relocation. And so, the transfer was staged as a kind of endless funeral procession. At night, long lines of carts rumbled through the narrow streets. They were filled not with coffins, but with bones. Skulls, femurs, ribs, piled high, wrapped in cloth, some still bearing fragments of coffins long rotted away. Torches flickered, casting orange light against the blackness, while priests walked alongside, chanting prayers for the departed. Each journey was a strange mixture of reverence and horror, a sacred ritual performed with the cold efficiency of mass transportation. Residents who witnessed the process spoke of the sound, the dull clattering of bones shifting inside the carts, as if the dead themselves were restless at being moved. The streets fell silent when the processions passed. Doors closed, windows shuttered. Some whispered that the spirits of the dead followed the carts, invisible mourners drifting through the night. The destination was the quarries, which stretched beneath Paris like a hidden city. Workers carved out chambers and corridors, preparing spaces for the vast tide of bones. When the carts arrived, the remains were carried down steep stairways into the darkness, illuminated only by torchlight. The air was damp and heavy, thick with the scent of earth and limestone. Down there, in the belly of Paris, the bones were stacked. This was not random burial. Over time, the workers arranged the bones with an eerie sense of order. Skulls were placed in rows, facing outward, staring eternally into the black. Femurs were stacked like bricks, creating walls of bone that stretched for yards. Here and there, decorative patterns emerged, crosses made of skulls, arches formed from tibias, geometric designs crafted from fragments of humanity. What began as a sanitary measure slowly transformed into a grotesque architecture, a necropolis sculpted by human hands. The numbers were staggering. Over the decades, more than 6 million corpses were transferred into the catacombs. Entire cemeteries were emptied, Les Innocents, Saint-Eustache, Saint-Nicolas-des-Champs, and many more. With every procession, another chapter of Paris's living history was erased above ground and reassembled below. Imagine the descent, a line of torchbearers carrying bones down into the earth, each step echoing against stone, the chants of priests mixing with the clatter of carts, and then silence, as the bones found their place in the growing labyrinth of the dead. By day, the city bustled as usual. The markets rang with merchants' cries, the salons buzzed with talk of revolution and enlightenment. But at night, Paris lived a second life. Beneath its cobblestones, the dead were on the move, crossing the city in shadow, filling the earth with a hidden weight. The catacombs of Paris were not born in a single night. They were built cartload by cartload, prayer by prayer, bone by bone. Each torch-lit procession carried with it a fragment of the city's soul until the earth beneath Paris became one of the largest necropolises in human history.
And so the elegant city of lights rested on a foundation of darkness. Beneath the laughter of taverns and the music of salons, 6 million skeletons lay in silent order, their skulls grinning from endless walls. The city of bones had been born, not as a deliberate creation, but as the grim consequence of life, death, and the struggle of a city to survive its own past.
Step off the final stair, and you leave the world of Paris behind. The faint sound of footsteps above, the rattle of carriage wheels, the laughter of cafes, all vanish. What surrounds you now is silence, broken only by the faint drip of water from the limestone ceiling. A torch flares, its light revealing what at first seems like stone walls. But then you realize they are not stone at all. They are bones. Rows of femurs stacked like bricks, skulls arranged in neat rows, their empty sockets staring out at you. Patterns carved not from marble or granite, but from human remains. Crosses made from tibias, hearts formed from vertebrae. Endless corridors of geometric design stitched together with fragments of the dead. The Catacombs of Paris were more than a burial site. They were a deliberate, haunting architecture. Workers of the late 18th and early 19th centuries didn't simply dump bones into the tunnels. They shaped them. They built walls, columns, even altars out of skeletons. Each turn of the corridor revealed a new pattern, a macabre artistry, a reminder that death itself had been transformed into design. And at the entrance, carved into stone, are words that echo through the centuries. Arrête, c'est ici l'empire de la mort. Stop, this is the empire of death. It is not a metaphor, it is a declaration. You are entering a kingdom not ruled by kings or republics, but by the 6 million souls interred here. The contrast is staggering. Above ground, Paris dazzles, the city of lights, of art, of revolution, of laughter. The Seine glitters under moonlight. Lovers stroll across bridges. Music spills from salons. But directly beneath, in a mirror world hidden by stone, lies an empire of silence. Instead of boulevards, corridors stretch endlessly into the dark. Instead of walls of brick, towers of skulls rise on either side. The city of light rests on a foundation of shadow. Visitors who descend for the first time often describe a suffocating weight. The air is cooler, damp, tinged with the mineral scent of limestone and the faint dust of old bones. The flame of your torch trembles against a skull's hollow gaze. You are reminded unavoidably that every wall here was once a living human being, someone who walked the streets above, who laughed, wept, prayed, and died. Now all that remains is stacked in silence. The architecture alone is chilling, but it is the legends that make the catacombs infamous. For centuries, whispers have told of restless spirits that roam these tunnels. Torchlight flickering on a damp wall can suddenly appear as a shadowy figure. Echoes in the distance might be mistaken for footsteps that do not belong to the living. Some visitors claim they have heard whispers, indistinct voices that seem to emerge from the walls of skulls themselves. The catacombs are vast, stretching for more than 200 miles beneath the city, though only a small portion is open to the public. It is a labyrinth, a place where direction vanishes, where every corridor looks the same. Countless stories exist of people becoming lost within. In 1793, during the French Revolution, a group of rebels reportedly hid in the catacombs only to vanish, never seen again. In the 19th century, urban explorers and thrill seekers wandered in with candles, and some never returned. Even today, modern cataphiles, secret explorers of the forbidden tunnels, speak of sudden panic, of feeling watched, of the crushing realization that one wrong turn could mean death in the dark. One of the most haunting legends tells of Philibert Ospiart, a doorkeeper of the Val de Grace Hospital. In 1793, he entered the catacombs carrying only a single candle, searching for a hidden cache of liquor rumored to be stored in the tunnels. He never emerged. 11 years later, his body was found, identified only by his keyring, lying among the bones. His skeleton rests in the catacombs to this day, a grim warning etched into legend. The dead claim those who dare to disturb their realm. Another tale, whispered by guides in hushed tones, is that of the midnight voices. They say that if you remain in the catacombs long enough after midnight, the walls begin to speak. At first, a faint murmur, like wind in the stone. Then distinct whispers, overlapping, calling your name, urging you deeper into the labyrinth. Many dismiss it as imagination, the tricks of darkness and fear. But to those who have heard it, the memory never fades. The atmosphere itself conspires to feed these legends. The tunnels are utterly dark. Without a light, there is no orientation, no sense of up or down. Your own heartbeat echoes in your ears. Your breath seems unnaturally loud. The longer you stay, the more your mind begins to imagine presences in the shadows. Psychologists today might call it sensory deprivation, but centuries ago, such feelings were proof of ghosts. For Parisians of the 19th century, the catacombs became a source of both fascination and dread. Tours were arranged, but always with strict rules. Groups entered only with guides, torches in hand, and often accompanied by music to soften the oppressive silence. Still, many emerged pale and shaken, claiming to have felt hands brushing their shoulders or glimpsed figures darting out of the torchlight. This strange dual life, the city of joy above, the city of bones below, gave Paris a reputation like no other. Visitors from across Europe came not just for the Louvre or Notre Dame, but to descend into the underworld beneath the boulevards. Writers, poets, and artists drew inspiration from the catacombs, describing them as the perfect symbol of human existence, beauty and decay, life and death, light and shadow. And so, even today, when tourists walk the narrow corridors lined with bones, they cannot help but shiver, not because of ghosts, perhaps, but because the catacombs remind us of a truth too easily forgotten. Beneath the city of light, beneath all civilization itself, lies the inevitable empire of death.
The catacombs did not remain frozen in the 18th century. As Paris evolved, as empires rose and fell, as the world lurched into modernity, the tunnels beneath the city continued to breathe with their own hidden life. What began as a desperate solution to a public health crisis slowly became a stage upon which new chapters of mystery and darkness were written. By the 19th century, the catacombs had already captured the imagination of Parisians. Word spread of the endless tunnels, of the macabre walls where skulls were stacked like mosaics and femurs built into neat columns. For the city's elite, artists, and dreamers, the catacombs became a morbid curiosity. But curiosity soon gave way to something stranger: secret gatherings. Whispers told of societies meeting in the shadows, far below the streets. These were not merely drunken adventures or youthful dares. The catacombs became host to occult ceremonies, hidden concerts, and clandestine salons. Candles flickered in alcoves. Violins played in chambers where the acoustics turned every note into something otherworldly. Some claimed philosophers and poets held gatherings there, seeking inspiration from the weight of mortality pressing down around them. Others swore that initiates of secret orders, Freemasons, spiritualists, and occultists performed rites amid the bones, believing the catacombs to be a threshold between the living and the dead. The atmosphere itself encouraged such beliefs. Every step echoed into infinity. The skulls seemed to watch, hollow eyes following every intruder. The air was damp, heavy, almost suffocating. To stand in the catacombs was to feel that time had stopped, and that death itself was the only true sovereign. But the catacombs would not only serve poets and occultists. The 20th century plunged Paris into fire and blood, and the tunnels took on a more tangible role in the survival of the city. When the Nazi forces occupied Paris during World War II, the Germans quickly recognized the tactical advantage of the underground labyrinth. The catacombs provided hidden routes and natural fortifications. German troops established bunkers within the tunnels, transforming ancient chambers of the dead into command posts of war. Yet, in an irony almost too poetic to believe, the same darkness that shielded the invaders also sheltered the resistance. The French resistance, desperate and defiant, used the catacombs as a secret network. Maps of the tunnels were passed in whispers, guiding fighters to meeting points hidden beneath the enemy's feet. Some sections became printing stations for underground newspapers, others makeshift hospitals for wounded partisans. In this subterranean world, freedom and tyranny coexisted, separated by little more than stone walls and silence. Imagine it, two enemies, one above the other, both navigating the same necropolis, both haunted by the silent witnesses of 6 million souls. After the war ended, Paris returned to peace, but the catacombs never lost their allure. They remained, as they always had been, a mirror of the city above. By the late 20th century, explorers, thrill-seekers, and dreamers, known as cataphiles, began to descend into the forbidden zones. Armed with flashlights and maps, they wandered far beyond the tourist paths, into kilometers of restricted tunnels where official tours never tread. Here, in the secret heart of the catacombs, they held underground parties, painted murals on ancient walls, even organized film screenings. Police patrolled, sealing entrances, but the explorers always returned. Some claimed that to truly know Paris, one had to descend into its underworld, to face not just the glamour of the city of light, but also the truth of its darkness. But with fascination came danger. Stories circulated of those who ventured too far and were never seen again. In 1990, a video camera was discovered deep within the catacombs. The footage it contained showed a lone explorer wandering the corridors, his light flickering, his breath quickening as panic grew. The video ended abruptly. The man never identified, never found. Was it a hoax? A real disappearance? No one knows. But the legend of the lost explorer became part of catacombs lore. Today, only a small fraction of the catacombs is open to tourists. Visitors descend a spiral staircase, step into the damp air, and are guided through a carefully maintained path, just 2 kilometers out of more than 300. They see the carefully stacked bones, the haunting inscriptions, the chilling reminder that death is the great equalizer. They marvel, they shiver, and then they climb back into daylight, relieved to escape, and then they climb back into daylight, relieved to escape the danger below. But beyond those tourist corridors lies the forbidden world, still largely untouched, still echoing with mystery. There are locked gates, warning signs, and guards. Yet there are also hidden entrances scattered throughout Paris. Manholes, broken stairwells, forgotten basements, where those willing to risk it slip inside. And once in, they walk the shadow paths, where history lingers, where legends of ghosts still whisper, where bones stretch endlessly into the dark. The catacombs are more than a monument. They are a reflection of Paris itself. Beauty and horror, light and shadow, elegance and decay, a city of romance above, a city of death below. And though centuries have passed since the first bones were laid there, the catacombs remain alive in the imagination of all who dare to think of them. Because to descend into them is not just to explore history, it is to confront the essence of mortality itself.
The catacombs are often described as a monument, a museum, a piece of history preserved beneath Paris. But to step into their silence, to run your hand along the damp wall where thousands of skulls stare back, is to realize they are something more, something far more unsettling. They are not just the past buried away, they are a mirror of humanity's deepest fear, death itself. For centuries, Paris has flourished as the city of light. Its boulevards glow with lanterns, its monuments gleam under the sun, its cafes hum with laughter. Tourists marvel at the Eiffel Tower, wander the Louvre, sip wine on the banks of the Seine. But beneath all that splendor, just a few stories below, lies a second city, a city of silence, of bones, of shadows. It is this contrast that makes the catacombs so haunting. The light of Paris above is inseparable from the darkness beneath. Every celebration of life in the city is balanced by the quiet testimony of death below. It is as if Paris itself has two souls, one bathed in brilliance, the other cloaked in eternal night. And the question that lingers is a chilling one. Are we ever truly safe? When you stroll through the lively streets of Montmartre, or when you stand on the Grand Plaza of Notre Dame, you may be smiling, laughing, even dancing, but beneath your feet there are millions of silent witnesses, bones stacked higher than any cathedral arch, skulls staring blankly from endless walls. You think you are walking through the city of love, but perhaps you are treading on the city of the dead. The catacombs remind us that civilizations are fragile and that human pride is temporary. In the 18th century, the people of Paris thought their world was secure until overflowing graves poisoned their water, until the stench of death forced them to bury their city underground. Even now, the catacombs whisper that death is not something we can escape. We can hide it, organize it, build museums around it, but it waits for all of us in the end. And yet there is beauty in the darkness. The bones are not tossed into chaos, but arranged with care. Arches of skulls, columns of femurs, crosses built of vertebrae. There is something deeply human in this attempt to impose order upon death, to make art from the inevitable. The catacombs are both horrifying and strangely serene, both grotesque and reverent. They tell us that we fear death, but we also try to understand it, to shape it into something that reflects meaning rather than despair. Visitors often leave the catacombs shaken, not because of what they saw, but because of what they felt. The silence presses into the soul. The inscriptions, biblical verses, grim reminders, warnings carved into stone echo in the mind long after one returns to daylight. And for many, the most haunting realization is this: those bones were once people who lived ordinary lives. They laughed, they worked, they loved, they feared. And now their remains are part of a wall, another brick in the architecture of death. One day we too may join them, forgotten, anonymous, woven into the fabric of the earth. That is the true legacy of the catacombs, not just a historical footnote, not just a tourist attraction, but a confrontation with the truth we avoid. They remind us of mortality in a world that tries to ignore it. They whisper that life above is temporary, fragile, fleeting.
And so as the camera drifts slowly through the tunnels, past skulls staring with hollow eyes, past inscriptions warning of death, past endless corridors fading into black, the voice of the narrator falls into a hush. These walls are not made of stone. They are not made of brick. They are built of memory. Millions of lives, millions of stories, millions of endings. And as the shadows close in, you cannot help but wonder, when you walk the streets of Paris, are you standing in the city of life or the city of death? The sound fades. The screen grows darker. Somewhere, far above, the lights of Paris glitter against the night sky. But here, deep below, there is only silence and the eternal company of the dead. Fade out. The toll of a single bell echoes into the darkness.